Hello folk, how you doing? Scotty. So recently there's been an infringement on individuals' rights. After the old firm game between Rangers and Celtic, you're going to get a lot of heated arguments and people saying things, shouting things, singing things, or saying whatever. It's very easy to take things out of context as well. Since this hate crime bill, and you would argue even to an extent even before then, two for Heart and Hand podcast had been arrested and over certain things that they had apparently says, and of course Union Bears had rightly come out and spoke in defence of them. And this is the thing that folk don't understand and for my argument, and I'm a libertarian, so obviously I'm going to come out and defend my position. Whether they said right things or wrong things, I'll still come out and defend the right to say it. Folk don't understand the importance of freedom of speech. That is to say, they don't understand that yes, sectarianism and racism is part of freedom of speech. Now, just because you support freedom of speech, it does not mean to say that you support the wrong things they say. That's what they don't understand. Just like in economics, whether you talk about the minimum wage or people's good intentions for all other things, they have the good intentions to try and get rid of the private sector and live in this, utopia, etc. There are consequences for their actions. Just like that with human nature, there are consequences for their actions regarding the economy. Well, it's no different with this political issue over freedom of speech. You have to ask yourself the question, who is it that's going to get to define what hate speech is? What hate speech is defined by one person is not going to be defined the same by another person. And it's very, very easy to offend people. You only have to disagree with somebody in order for them to pass you off as something. I can give you a prime example with the socialists' identity politics that I've pointed out before. They love to use the identity politics to say that if you support privatisation, that must mean you're a fascist. Well, that means that every single person out there in society that supports the private sector are all fascists then, because it's the same issue over the word racism. For example, when people said that they supported control over immigration, does that then mean that everybody that they passed off as racist because they supported control over immigration, that they are genuine racists? Just like the woman that I mentioned before, she posted and says that there's only two genders, and before you know it, she was arrested over something that she says. Well, that's her right to speak freely. That if you disagree with anybody that's socialist, then of course you must be disbanded and you're not allowed to go anywhere because you disagree. That's totalitarian in its mentality. I'll reiterate this again. I may never ever agree with what you say and the wrong things that you say, and I'll happily stand up and speak against it and put them in their place based on that, just as I would with anybody who supports fascism or that of communism. They don't seem to understand that just because I support people's right to speak freely doesn't mean to say that I support the wrong things that they say. These type of people were trying to conflate the two as if they're the same thing. The point is that you're supposed to challenge wrong speech through mere speech. You don't challenge wrong speech by trying to silence them, because it doesn't just apply, and this is what I mean by their good intentions are faced with dire consequences, because it doesn't just apply to those who are genuinely racist. It actually applies to a lot of innocent people, and we saw that with Heart and Hand podcast. The two of them get arrested for simply calling Celtic Park the piggery. I mean, for crying out loud, folk, how do you define that as racist? That whole thing for me where Celtic supporters call Ibrox Mordor and Rangers supporters call Celtic Park the piggery is all banter, and that's how it should be. It's very easy to offend people, and something could be passed off as racist that isn't even racist at all. Just like how, for example, I mentioned before, the Nazi pug video. It was a joke. They took that way out of context. Even the court said that context didn't matter. Irrespective of whether that was a joke or not, he still would have his freedom of speech, and he should have. If that was the case then, and you should silence all Nazis and silence all fascists, then why the hell, with double standards, are they not silencing every single socialist out there? Socialism was responsible for the deaths of countless millions of people, so why don't we just silence all of them then? It was the biggest atrocity in the 20th century, and right through into the 21st century. You could see that with the likes of Venezuela. I wouldn't want to silence those people, because they've got the right to speak freely, and that's not how you challenge such wrong speech. The only time that such rank speech should be investigated is when it comes to a death threat, because then you're threatening to infringe upon another individual's rights. Folk just seem oh so happy with their good intentions. In economics, you've got consequences that you're faced with. Just because you intend for something to be a certain given way doesn't mean it turns out that way in practice. Well, it's no different with that of the freedom of speech. How then do you define what hate speech is? I mean, I could say something that somebody disagrees with and you feel offended by it. For example, I could turn around and say to you, we should privatise the NHS. Well, that's going to be deemed offensive to a lot of people, isn't it? Just by simply disagreeing with them. It's not difficult to offend someone. So how then do you get around to defining what hate speech is then? Because after all, right now you are seeing socialists run around in Antifa, etc., saying that you're a racist, you're a fascist, and you're a Nazi, and you're a white supremacist for supporting the private sector, for opposing socialism, for basically standing against Black Lives Matter, that's a Marxist organisation. This is the joke that it's getting to. It's like saying, oh, you oppose Black Lives Matter, that must mean you oppose black people. What? That's the sort of nonsense it's getting to. It's identity politics. It's like someone saying you support the right for freedom of speech of people saying wrong things, that must mean you support the wrong things that they are saying. No. And I heard someone, like I says, on the Rangers group the other day, that because of my views, because of my political views, then I should not be welcomed into Ibrox to support Rangers, etc. Which is remarkable. So what's he trying to say? That libertarians, that your political persuasion should be rejected if you disagree with socialism? That's essentially what in fact, that is 100% what that is saying. You know, somebody has the right to have their views. Because if we were to use that same principle and say, well, racism is so offensive, every one of them should be silenced. What if I turn around and say to you, everybody who supports socialism should be silenced? The name of socialism has caused more grief than what racism ever has. Sorry, that's the truth. It led millions to their death. I mean, you're talking more than 100 million people that were wiped off the face of this earth, so by that logic then, we should silence everybody in the left wing. But I wouldn't want to, because I'm a libertarian, and I believe at the end of the day, no matter how wrong their views are, how immoral their views are, I'll still defend passionately their right to speak their free mind of what they believe in. Let me give you a prime example, and I've heard some of them that have come out and said things that are, straight to the point and very blunt, where they'll say they require a revolution to strip us of our individual rights and use the means of force against us, violence, just like what you saw what happened to the kulaks in the Soviet Union. That was honesty coming from communists. Does that mean to say that I support silencing them over that? Because that's a lot worse than people saying racist comments. Where do you then draw the line? Because it doesn't just stop at racism. It's down to Rangers themselves to decide what they want to do. Fair enough, nothing wrong with that. But it's when you get the state-run police involved in that of the government. I don't blame Rangers for that, because that's not their fault. That's actually the fault of the pressure that's been put on because the SNP. I don't think people even begin to understand how authoritarian all this is. And I've heard some of them coming out and saying that I talk garbage and that I need to wear a tinfoil hat or I need medication or some pish like this. Do they understand about economic and political history? They don't. They clearly don't even understand the first thing about the history of governments. And folk think that just because we've been living peacefully the way we have for several decades, that, oh well, that would never happen here. Never say never, folk. Never say never. Don't think just because currently it's authoritarian with the current regime, but all it takes is a nutcase to get in there. You don't know how far things are going to go with regards to how authoritarian. But it looks like in the past decade or so, you've been seeing more and more stuff creeping in. It was bad enough, they says, that you didn't know what you were voting for. You were patronising you. That was the political class for you. And then all of a sudden, they're now passing through things like this to do with the hate crime bill. They wanted to get through the Named Persons Act. Legal state guardian, for crying out loud, up to the age of 18. And folk didn't even see a problem with that. I'm not thinking to myself, Jesus, Adolf Hitler would be proud of that. After the pandemic, which was bad enough as it is, they then want to set down permanent restrictions so that they can impose lockdowns at any given time. People just think of that and think to themselves, oh, the government's just doing this for the sake of our well-being. The government means so well to us. They would never do anything bad to us. They just take that for granted. They think the role of government's just there to look after them. As if to say government's got the best intentions and it's all for the sake of the people. In other words, to be blunt, they're just gullible. But it's the same thing with this whole thing that folk have got over the freedom of speech. They're against it. And that's very worrying in this country. Very worrying. People are slowly and gradually accepting certain things getting passed through in slow and gradual over a long period of time. So they've passed the hate crime bill already, and people are already forgetting about it, and they're starting to accept it. And then they start to do that with the next thing, which of course is the COVID passports, and then they just accept that. They just think, oh well, it's all for the greater good of the greater number. And then of course it moves on to the next thing with permanent restrictions over lockdowns, etc. Where do you draw the line? Folk just think it's just the case, oh well, you know, it's just for the greater good of the greater number of society. It's a scary thing because folk just don't understand socialism. That's kind of the whole purpose behind the videos that I do in my channel. And someone interestingly brought up a very good point, by the way. One could come out and say, well, the Scottish national anthem is so offensive to me because it says about, you know, sending English people homewards. Some people could say, well, you know, it's just a case that, you know, that's speaking about people in the past. But I have seen Scottish nationalists. I've got first-hand experience. I voted no in 2014, and a number of them were saying to me, go back home. You're not welcome here in Scotland. Why don't you F off back to England? You traitor, you Judas, you this, that, and the next thing. I was getting all the death threats, by the way, for saying I was going to vote no to Scottish independence. Well, how are people supposed to interpret that? Just because certain folk who are nationalists might interpret that as meaning nothing, others might interpret that as hatred. And I don't care whether it's folk singing, you know, the famine's over, why don't you go home? I don't care. You know, that's their individual right to, you know, sing whatever the hell they like and believe whatever the hell they like. And I was born in 1984. Long gone are the days where you used to just be able to say something and that was it. Get on with your life. But now you live in a society where it's full of, oh, honest to God, man. Where's your backbone? People becoming more and more dependent upon the state. The consequences that follow that is not just the end of your freedom of speech. A very dark place with regards to your economy. And trust me, when you can't challenge the government for its wrongdoing with regards to its policies, decision making, take for example, just look at the climate change alarmism. They basically want zero emissions. It's all well having all these good intentions, but what does fossil fuels go into producing? Many things. The detrimental impact that these socialists are going to have on your life, on the economy as a whole, it will be seen as widespread, and it will destroy many jobs, and especially requiring higher tax rates. Businesses won't stick around for that, because with economic freedom comes prosperity. That's why nothing rivals a free market. Not one single mixed economy across the face of the entire planet Earth, not a single Scandinavian country even comes close to rivaling the history of Singapore and Hong Kong when they were both free markets. Just look at Norway, who abused the North Sea oil for the past 6 decades, then contrast that to Hong Kong that had practically no natural resources. That's why every socialist economy across the planet Earth is a shithole. Oh, I've said something so offensive. What you going to do now? Call me a racist? Because one thing happens, then it becomes a tit for tat. Since one person has said something and ends up getting done for it, then retaliation comes from it, and that doesn't help, because all it does is it exacerbates the problem. And I get a lot of hateful comments through my own channel and everything. After all, I'm targeting socialism itself. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and of course if you like the video, if you get into the ad in yourself that I might have missed it, comment in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you for watching. I shall talk to you later. Cheers.